Okay, Erev Tov everyone. So just two quick announcements before I start. One is that I may not be here tomorrow for mincha-maariv. If you don't see me here tomorrow night, that is not an indication that I've gone to a demonstration or counter-demonstration. It's a family commitment, and that's the only reason why I won't be here. Number two is, beginning next week, we're going to try something a little bit different to give a little bit more structure to these shiurim in terms of between mincha-maariv, in terms of the topics and the svarim that we will be studying together. So there's a plan, we'll see if it works, but I'll let you know. I'm going to keep it a surprise for now, but that's beginning next week. Each day we'll have a different topic that we'll be covering or trying to cover, often kavua. Okay, but for today I want to carry on the topic we started dealing with yesterday, which is a fascinating discussion. The deeper you go into it, the more fascinating it becomes. Really, it sounds very mundane. Do we say v'tein bracha or v'tein talamatali bracha? We switched what we were saying last night. Well, some of us, those of us who are in Eretz Yisrael, who live in Eretz Yisrael, we spoke about people traveling from one place to another, and it gets a little bit complicated. And again, all of this is based on the fact. Really, there's another question we could have asked. Maybe we did ask it already on Shmini Atzeret. We started saying Mashiva Ruach Umrin Ageshem. We then wait until Zayin v'Cheshvan for all the Olei HaRegel to return before we start saying V'tein Tanu Matali Bracha, before we start asking for rain. Right? You could say nowadays nobody is going back, and even more than that, in our days there are different means of transportation that did not exist back in the day. So even B'Ezrat Hashem b'Meirav Yameinu, the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt and there'll be Aliyah L'Regel again. No one's going to get wet because everybody's going back in their cars. So maybe then we'll start saying V'tein Tanu Matali Bracha already before Zayin Cheshvan. I saw a tshuva today from Rav Rimon where he writes that we're not going to change the minhag now. It's right, it's not relevant for this year anyway, but he says based on this and a number of considerations that if somebody was to have said in these past 2 weeks, if somebody said V'tein Tanu Matali Bracha, he says they wouldn't have to go back. Although that's not our minhag to say it now, you would not have to repeat because of that reason. Anyway, that's one point which is interesting. And then the other point, which is, as we said, it's only in Eretz Yisrael that we start saying now V'tein Tanu Matali Bracha. In Chutz La'aretz, you wait until the 60 days of the Tkufa, as the Gemara explains, which falls out to about the 5th of December, and 4th or 5th or 6th, depending on a number of factors. But why is that? And that is because Bavel is not so dependent. All of Chutz La'aretz follows after Bavel. And Bavel is not so dependent on the rain. In other words, since they don't need the rain as much, they only start asking for it later on. Okay, then there are all sorts of different discussions that come up in the Rishonim and the Achronim as well. What happens if you live in a different place that does need the rain, it doesn't need the rain, etc. The question we always had growing up, which was very interesting, was when you're in the southern hemisphere and the seasons are switched. So then when do you ask for it? So they always told us, when we were growing up, they said, we're praying for Eretz Yisrael, so we ask for the rain when they need it. It's not so simple, it's not so straightforward, but in any event, that is... these are some of the issues, the peripheral issues that come up. There's also a very interesting chayal which comes up now related to the war in chayalim, which we'll touch on if we have time. But I just want to go back through and just give the summary, because we do want to end up with the bottom line of the answer. What happens when somebody is traveling from one place to another throughout these days between Zayin Cheshvan and the beginning of December, and it comes up, it's very, very common. Many people are traveling in both directions, and there are a number of different factors. So let's go through. I'm going to read from the Piskei Tshuvot, the way he summarizes the dinim. Piskei Tshuvot is not necessarily an authoritative sefer, but he gives a very good summary over here of the different opinions that exist. So he starts off, he quotes the Mishnah Berurah. We didn't talk about this last night, but the Mishnah Berurah explains as follows. He says, Ben Eretz Yisrael b'chul, o lehefech, im da'ato toch shana lachzor shoel kimkomo. Okay, this is based on some of the earlier poskim who say that somebody who's traveling back and forth between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. We have this question as well by other matters, most famously when it comes to Yom Tov Sheni, right? Yom Tov Sheni Shogaliot, somebody who lives in Chutz La'aretz, is in Eretz Yisrael. Right? These questions come up. At what stage do we define that a person is considered now a Ben HaMakom where he is, or a Ben HaMakom of where he came from? When does his status change? And anyway, regarding this halacha, what we find in the classical poskim, and there are some who adopt this formulation for Yom Tov Sheni as well. There are some who say differently. But it says shana. Essentially, we assume if within a year the person is going back, this is what the Mishnah Berurah says. So he says you're going, within a year, you're going back to the place where you came from. So then he says, Shoel kim komo. So then you say whatever they say in the place where you live. Okay, we haven't gone to the halakha l'maaseh yet, but this is opinion number one. It says a person lives in Eretz Yisrael. Right now they're in Chutz La'aretz on holiday. Doesn't matter. They would do what they do in Eretz Yisrael, and vice versa. That's one opinion. That is the opinion of the Pri Chadash, of the Pri Megadim, and the Mishnah Berurah quotes that. What's the reason for that? The reason for that is essentially you are a Ben Eretz Yisrael. We're praying for rain. So essentially we say you're praying for rain where you need it. If I live in Eretz Yisrael, I need rain in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore that's when I should ask for the rain. If I live in Chutz La'aretz, I should pray for the rain when they need it in Chutz La'aretz. That's what it's based on. Hang on. So that's one opinion. So one opinion says we go by wherever I live. The second opinion says this is the Chidah, quotes in the Birkei Yosef, and he says, I don't care where you live, I care where you are. Wherever you are right now, in your makom, that's what you should ask for. Because you're asking for a rain, which is chayei sha'ah, which is what I need now. Right now, the place where I am, that's what I need. And then there's a third opinion. The Berei Tev brings a third opinion, it's called mincha-maariv, and others, who says that based on actually the Radbaz, who says that no, he says even if you're in Eretz Yisrael, even if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you should ask like Eretz Yisrael, meaning you came from Eretz Yisrael, but you're now in Chutz La'aretz and you plan to be there for longer than a year, you still ask like Eretz Yisrael. And then he qualifies, he says that's when you've left your family behind. When your family, your wife and your children are still in Eretz Yisrael, you traveled for business, whatever. So they're behind there, so you go for what they need. So you still pray for rain like Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but those are the three basic opinions. I think it's much more complicated because when did I travel? When did I come back? Etc. So the Piskei Teshuvah writes as follows. He says, "Hinei b'torot ha'achronim shanesiot mehachal hatam kalot u'meirot." Okay, he says now in these generations when the journey from here to there is easy and fast. He doesn't say cheap, but it's easy and fast. Okay, and people are traveling back and forth all the time. And nowadays we find, all of this, you have two lines in the Mishnah Berurah, and that's it. These are questions now, very, very practical. There's a lot of confusion. Okay, if there's mevucha between the Gdolei Hador, all the more so it's going to be mevucha for us. Okay, so we have to understand exactly how to, what do we do? So here's the summary. This is the most common and most mainstream practice as follows. So we spoke about some of it last night. Do quick chazara, and we'll talk about the final case as well. So he says, Ben Eretz Yisrael nosei lechutz la'aretz. I live in Eretz Yisrael, and I'm traveling to Chutz La'aretz. The din is as follows. Im yotzei me'eretz Yisrael achar le'el zayin mar cheshvan. So if you're traveling now, once we've started saying v'tein talumatar livracha already in Israel, mamshich lishor gam biyoto b'chutz la'aretz. Even now you're in Chutz La'aretz, you carry on saying what you said at home in Eretz Yisrael, you carry on saying v'tein talumatar normally, because you've already started, you don't stop. Even if you're traveling for a long period, not if you're moving, okay, but you're traveling for an extended period even. So that is case number one. Case number two, it says okay, this may be relevant for those watching on Zoom. If you left Eretz Yisrael before Zayin Cheshvan, so somebody who lives here but is now in Chutz La'aretz, but they didn't start saying V'tein talumatar livracha already, so now what do? So he says, Azai miler Zayin Cheshvan ve'elach yish'al al hagshamim bebirkat shomei tefillah. We saw this yesterday in Rav Shlomo Zalman, right? You would say now the extra bakasha of Geshem in shomei tefillah. You can't lose because the din is that even if you were meant to say V'tein talumatar and you forgot to say it, then you can go back and you can say it in Shema Koleinu to make up. So that essentially is what we say over there. Okay, so somebody who lives in Eretz Yisrael who's gone to Chutz La'aretz, depends when they left. If they left before Zayin Cheshvan, then they should start saying it in Shema Koleinu. If they left afterwards, they'd already started saying it, then they carry on saying it normally. Now, what about the opposite case? What about somebody who is from Chutz La'aretz but is now in Eretz Yisrael? So he writes here, Ben Chutz La'aretz haba le'Eretz Yisrael, yesh lo lish'ol al hagshamiim keven Eretz Yisrael kol zman shenimtza sham. It says that while you are here, you should do what they do in Eretz Yisrael. I'm not going to say what. That's a different sugya. It's a different sugya. I'm not getting into it now. Okay, there are poskim who hold that way, by the way, but it's not so simple. There is a certain overlap between the two sugyot, but there are different considerations as well. Here we're talking about what one asks for in tefillah, whether one asks for rain or not. Like I say, there is a certain overlap with the sugya of Yom Tov Sheni, but there are a number of other considerations there as well. But that's what he says. So, יש לו לשאול על הגשמים כבן ארץ ישראל, כל זמן שנמצא שם. עכשיו, כשחוזר לחוץ לארץ, ועדיין לא הגיע יום 60 לתקופה, okay, so here's the complicated case. If you're from Chutz La'aretz and you're in Eretz Yisrael on Zayin Cheshvan, so you start saying V'tein Talu Matar Livracha, so now you go back, but they haven't started saying V'tein Talu Matar there yet, so then what do? So he says, Yafsik mini-shiur, you should stop. ויש אומרים שנכון שימשיך לשאול בשומע תפילה. Those just say actually you should carry on asking over there in שומע תפילה until we get to the beginning of December, the 60th day of the tkufa, and you can say like everybody else. Okay, one other caveat, we mentioned this last night as well. It says, אם מתפלל כשליח ציבור לפני העמוד. Right, the person you are now, the chazan, you're from Chutz La'aretz or you're from Eretz Yisrael, and your minhag now is different to what they're doing. So when you're the shliach tzibur, leolam al yishnei minhag hamakom shnimtza sham. Do like the minhag hamakom, say whatever they say. But in the tefillat halachash, you can say differently. But in the tefillah and the chazara, you should not. Ve'eino tzarich lemnoa atzmo minipayal lifnei amud ekev kach. This is not a reason you don't have to. This is brought in the name of Rav Shlomo Zalman. You do not have to prevent yourself from being the shliach tzibur because you're going to say v'tein talu matar or v'tein bracha, etc. Whichever way it goes. Okay, just have a couple of minutes to mention a fascinating chayal which comes up. Over the course of the last 2 years, from time to time, we have addressed different issues, different shailot and shuvot that have come up as a result of the war. So you would think, right, v'tein bracha, v'tein talu matar livracha, what relevance does that have to the question of war? So I saw this shayla, which Rav Ovadia in Chelek Bet of Yechav Da'at is asked the following question: Chayalei tzahal שנמצאים בסיני ובגולן. So over the border, right outside of Eretz Yisrael, האם דינם כבני ארץ ישראל כדין שאלה תלו מטר? Are they judged like those who are inside Eretz Yisrael? And they start saying, ותן תלו מטר on זין חשבן? Or to be saying, הם שואלים תלו מטר, הם יום 60 לתקופה, כבני חוץ לארץ. Okay, they're over the border in Syria or wherever it is. What would they do? So he says essentially, at the end of the day, his conclusion is that they would ask for Talu Matar Livracha from Zayin Cheshvan. There are for a number of reasons why he says they are judged. They are essentially a tzibur of Eretz Yisrael, even if they're a little bit over the border. He brings a number of different proofs for it. He says, I'll just read one paragraph. He says, Banidon shelanu, shamedubah b'tzibur gadol, shel chayalei tzahal v'anshei miluim. We're dealing with a large community of soldiers and anshei miluim. First of all, their families are still in Eretz Yisrael. And we saw that was a consideration. All their sustenance, all their food and everything is brought from Eretz Yisrael as well. So for that and a number of other factors, he says, certainly, their intent is to return as soon as they can. And therefore, he says they would be judged like Bnei Eretz Yisrael, and they would be saying, already from Zayin Cheshvan. Rabbi Kenigsberg אומר שהקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל לפעמים חשבון להם תורה מצוות. שני המעדני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיר תורה וידע.